Ni hao, Mr. Ma. Hello, everybody. My name is Miloš Krajšnik. Today is Wednesday, December 17th. And so this first article, and so this has actually been discussed earlier, about a month ago. There was a Taiwan warning. So the first two articles are tied together, but it says global affairs officials in China to pave way for the Carney visit, right? And so, senior global affairs leadership and a parliamentary aide to Prime Minister Mark Carney are in China now for talks that could pave the way for him to visit next year. Mr. Carney is looking for new export markets because of an increasingly protectionist United States under President Donald Trump. Is trying to patch up relations with Beijing after a severe diplomatic rupture in years of Canada barring state-owned Chinese companies from investing there. Yes, we should be barring state-owned Chinese companies from investing and operating here. This is what happened with Huawei. Huawei wanted to put up 5G towers all over the place, and we ended up blocking them. Why did we block them? Basically because Donald Trump told us to block them. Blackface didn't have the foresight, or the liberal government at the time didn't have the foresight of what Chinese 5G towers would actually mean for North America, right? If you own the internet infrastructure of a country, you basically get full eyes on everybody in that country, and any links, dollar flows, money flows going back and forth with anybody. And so this is why the US blocked it. This is why Donald Trump blocked it in 2016 and had the CFO arrested, was because it would have been a backdoor into gaining even deeper insights into the U.S. economy, and U.S. citizens, and all of that. And they did this again in a different way through TikTok, obviously. And now we're seeing what's going on with TikTok here, how TikTok USA is kind of being bought out, and it's you have to protect your citizenry. If anybody's gonna be spying on its citizens, the government should be spying on its own citizens, to be honest. If we're gonna be looking at things, in that way, you don't want a foreign power looking at everything that you're doing, you as a government and your citizens. That is unprecedented leverage. You know what I mean? And it's good that got blocked when it got blocked, right? But and now I'm not saying that we shouldn't trade with China. 5% of trade, there was 5% trade of like Canada's exports. 5% was going to China previously. Now it's below 1%. We've been thawing relations with India, who's actually less than 1% export trade partner with Canada. We need to have trade with China, absolutely. But our trade right now remains locked. This trade war was triggered with 100% tariffs on Chinese EVs, steel, and aluminum, which was imposed under the Biden administration. So this wasn't even a Trump thing. This was a Biden thing. Trump started it, Biden escalated. And we haven't actually escalated post-Biden, right? So this is where we're at. And to be honest, I don't think it's that big of a problem that we have tariffs on Chinese metals, to be honest, steel and aluminum. I think that Canada should actually just improve its internal infrastructure and buy its own aluminum and steel. That would probably be the best way to go. Then we don't have to rely on different countries for our steel and for our aluminum, things that we already have in country, right? No nation that seriously looks at national strategy will actually go out and buy strategic materials from different nations, become reliant and dependent on those different nations for strategic materials when they have it themselves. They just won't. Why? Because your manufacturing, this is basically what steel and aluminum is, your manufacturing base is then heavily reliant or almost completely reliant on a different country. Supply chains will get messed up, and it just leads it leads to what you basically have right now in Canada, right? Now everything in Canada is being reactionary to buy Canada, right? We talked about it yesterday. Now we are sending a big trade delegation to China. So again, I fully support us actually boosting our exports to China again. We can do it in a different way. I don't think that Chinese state-owned companies should be coming into Canada because they're tied to China. They're tied to the state. Even private companies in China opening up offices in Canada, those are all, everything is Chinese state affiliated. You can have private companies, the state is always an owner. That's just the way it is in China, right? We can trade with them, but do you really want their companies doing business directly in Canada? I don't know. I don't think so. I don't think it's a good idea. The US definitely doesn't think it's a good idea. And so you can see we have the Deputy Foreign Affairs Minister David Morrison and Cody Blah, Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister, are among those who traveled to Beijing this week. They are joined by Aaron Fowler, Associate Assistant Deputy Minister for International Trade and Chief Trade Negotiator at the Department of Global Affairs. This is a pretty strong delegation. Trump is also having, he has a plan to go to have a meeting with Xi in April. So this is nothing new. We need this. We do. China is a major player in the world. We need to have some kind of cordial relationship with them. We have to have some kind of trade relationship with them. But to supplant the U.S. with China in that kind of way, this is what it seems that the Carney government's trying to do, or that Carney is specifically trying to do, because of these tariffs, right? Like U.S. tariffs aren't. They hurt the countries, that the U.S. traded with, but the tariffs themselves, they stemmed from somewhere. Like it wasn't just like a cowboy move on the part of the U.S. administration, right? The need for them stemmed from somewhere, right? And they clearly stayed policy because the Biden administration expanded on them, right? Obviously with China, but the Trump has widened them again and done it with key allies and stuff like that. So we can't be that critical of the tariffs themselves. If anything, it's been a wake-up call to Canada. Now, how we're going to use that wake-up call is up to us, right? If Canada escalated trade tensions with China, mirroring the U.S. policy without actually securing protections or alternatives for Canadian producers, that's a Canadian problem, right? That's a blackface Justin problem. That's a Mark Carney problem now, because Mark Carney hasn't systematically fixed the issue, right? He's trying to do things, trying to thaw these relations with China. We're talking about these big infrastructure projects. He's talked to the U.S. a lot, but we haven't actually had a lot of progress made with the U.S. in terms of lowering tariffs. So, what should really be the priority? Should we be lowering the existing tariffs on the U.S.? It seems like that would be such an easier problem solver to the Canadian issue, or do we have to now fly around the entire world trying to build out new trade deals with different powers, right? And China's not a benevolent power at all. They're a dictatorship. So they going to China is almost like going against Canadian principles, The current re-engagement, it's being framed as pragmatic diplomacy, right? But it's occurring from a position of weakness rather than leverage. And it's quite simply because these tariffs are hitting Canada hard, and now we're reacting to it. And whenever you're trying to deal in negotiations from a position of desperation, you end up getting desperate deals done. You don't get good deals done. And I mean, I guess we're going to see what this looks like, but this is typically what this looks like, at least in a business sense, right? The other thing is it seems that Canada's trying to flip flop on policy that it's implemented, right, toward China over the last 3 years. You can't really be flip flopping on policies that quickly, right? And so it really seems like the Carney government is backpedaling from a confrontation they actually helped create, and not because China changed, but because the U.S. protectionism actually exposed how little room Canada actually has to maneuver, right? And so the reset is being sold as pragmatism, but it really looks like damage control. Yeah, it just looks like damage control. And I want to get into this next article now, because it ties into this very well. So the Taiwanese official warns Carney is boosting ties with China will leave Canada vulnerable to coercion. And I'm not going to get into this too much, but it says here, senior Taiwanese official is warning Prime Minister Mark Carney of the perils of boosting trade relations with China, saying economic dependency will ultimately give Beijing leverage to use against China. Probably because that's what China does. That's what the Belt and Road Initiative is. China's bought up ports across all of South Asia, all across the Indian Ocean, all across Africa, the Horn of Africa. They even bought the port of Thessaloniki in Greece. They're giving themselves access to world trade. When you become a dependent of a country like China, they're going to put the screws on you economically. That's just the way they do. They're going to do it that way instead of actually militarily coercing you in any way. And so Ming Chi Chen, Taiwan's deputy minister of foreign affairs, points to recent retaliatory measures China took against Japan over remarks by the Japanese prime minister that a Chinese attack on Taiwan could prompt a military response from Tokyo. Mr. Carney in November accepted an invitation from Xi Jinping to travel to China in the new year after the first formal meeting between a Canadian prime minister and the Chinese president since 2017. Yeah, I mean, and so this is the thing. Japan and Taiwan are key Western allies. They just are, right? Obviously, China has its reasons for wanting to own Taiwan. I mean, that's not unusual. Here we go. Here's Taiwan right here. This is China. And this is Japan. This is South Korea. So what you see here, and this is the South China Sea, right? And what you see here, why Taiwan, I mean, Taiwan is key for a number of reasons, right? But why this really is key for, or at least Taiwan here, for China, is because it opens access for China. It opens access into the Pacific for China, right? Right now, the maritime borders of Japan, Taiwan, and the Philippines, all NATO allies, block open access to the Pacific Ocean to China. Basically, China, when it has to, and South Korea is a part of this as well, whenever China has to trade, it basically has to go literally along its border here to, be able to have open access. So its trade access, like its maritime trade access, is actually extremely restricted, like insanely, right? So this is what it has to do. It goes like this. It has to ask permission to enter maritime waters for trade. No one wants to do that. Why the hell would you want to do that, right? If you took Taiwan, you would just go poop. That's it. That's one thing. The other thing is Taiwan is obviously a major microchip hub, right? U.S. assets exist in Taiwan. Serious advanced microchips are being produced in Taiwan. So this is what this conflict is all about, right? It's technology leverage, and China wants that. The U.S. wants to keep that up. So, and Canada is obviously a part of this whole, indirectly or even directly, being a NATO ally. You want to support your own allies. Obviously, you're going to want to do trade, conduct some kind of trade with China because it's a massive country. There's so many people. There's major manufacturing hub. The U.S. trades with them as well. That's not under question. But do you really want them to be sending their companies like Huawei to be setting up 5G networks across Canada so that they can have direct access into all of the movements of your citizenry? Do you really want that? I think obviously, I hope this is a rhetoric question, because the answer should be no. And so, Taiwan's warning is really landing, because it comes from experience, right? Countries don't get coerced by China after trusting it a little. They get coerced after becoming economically dependent and discovering too late that trade access is actually conditional, right? And I know we're all very hyped up about trying to stick it to the U.S. and all of that, and that's fine. But we need to be weary of how we're going to do that. That's it. And I wanted to get into this article. I just think this is hilarious, honestly. The lack of foresight, the short-sightedness that exists, like just generally amongst Canadian politicians when it comes to foreign affairs and how different countries are going to view Canadians doing certain things, I think is just hilarious. And so what the story is, there's a delegation of 30 Canadians, 6 MPs that went to Israel, that were supposed to go into the West Bank to do investigative journalism, essentially to talk to Muslims, talk to Christians, talk to Jewish people in the West Bank to see kind of what's going on the ground, right? The thing is, it was funded by the Canadian Muslim Brotherhood, or what was it called? So it was funded by the Canadian Muslim Vote, right? And basically, Israel declared it a terrorist organization a while ago, and everybody's surprised that Canadians weren't allowed to go into the West Bank.
It was here at the Allenby crossing that the Canadian delegation waited for hours, only to be told by Israeli border agents they could not enter the occupied West Bank.
What we collectively and individually felt was, we felt insulted. We felt absolutely rejected for reasons that we have no idea.
The delegation, organized by the nonprofit.
I mean, buddy, if you don't know why you were rejected, honestly, then you have issues. You actually have serious issues.
The Canadian Muslim Vote intended to spend 3 days talking to refugees, aid groups, along with Muslim, Jewish, and Christian individuals in the West Bank. Instead, 30 people, including 6 MPs, 1 NDP, and 5 Liberals, were turned around.
And I don't want to turn this into a racial thing, but it is a bit of a racial thing. You're sending, aside from the fact that they're NDP and Liberal MPs, right? You're sending 5 Muslims, essentially. No, I mean, not essentially, they are. You can tell by their names, right? Ikra Khalid, that's a Muslim name. Samir Zuberi, as well. Aslan Rana, Farah Salsoud. You're sending, people of a specific religious affiliation, of a specific ethnicity. They might be not their nationality might be Canadian, but they're of a specific ethnicity. And this is what Israel's looking at. That's one of the things they're looking at. You're sending these people to go do investigative journalism in the West Bank. But Israel has already announced that it's going to annex the West Bank. It's already annexed the Golan Heights, right? And it capitalized on a weak military situation of Syria, essentially, because Bashar al-Assad was basically the reason why they didn't officially annex it. They kind of occupied it for a while, but because he's gone and al-Shalami is... the country's just in a state of disarray. They've actually officially annexed the Golan Heights, right? Now they're decimating Gaza. And I'm not going to get into, the Israeli-Gazan conflict, the whole Palestinian conflict, but are you actually surprised that they're not letting these people into the West Bank? Honestly, Do you think that Canadian benevolence is so far-reaching that it can just go walk into any part of the world that's a potential conflict zone? Not even, I mean, it is a potential conflict. That's not even like a probability. It is a potential conflict zone. Like without any repercussions. I think that this is so extremely short, especially when it's being financed by the Canadian Muslim vote. Really? Like, what do you think? Like, honestly, what do you think that the Israeli government, while all of this conflict is going on against Hamas in Gaza, is going to think that it's like, look, the Canadian Muslim vote is financing Canadian members of parliament. Let's look at their names. Oh, okay, yeah. To go into the West Bank, to go talk to Muslim refugees, Christians, and Jewish people. Yeah, we're going to let them do that. Okay. That is so arrogant and ignorant. It's both. It's actually both. It's arrogant and ignorant. It baffles my mind. It genuinely does.
With one MP claiming she was pushed.
Frankly, I think it's insulting. I really do.
Liberal Faraz Al-Soud says he expected pushback, but never expected many in the group would be told to sign paperwork deeming them a risk to public safety and security.
They only gave us this very vague terminology of public security or public safety or public order considerations. And when we pried just a slight bit, they pushed back significantly, making it clear that they did not need to provide any reasoning.
The group has no intention on trying to cross again and says this rejection is part of a pattern by the Israeli government.
Dialogue is important, diplomacy is important, and this today was a wrongful decision on the part of Israeli authorities.
Israel's embassy to Canada says the delegation was...
What diplomacy, though? What diplomacy? You're going there to go talk to refugees. That has nothing to do with diplomacy. These guys are just talking out of their asses. It makes no sense. Like, everything that they're saying is they're just butthurt that they didn't get to go in and and talk to refugees and paint a specific picture of what's going on. The picture might be accurate. I don't want to get into that at all. But quite honestly, it just amazes me that they actually thought that the Israeli government was going to let them in. So I wanted to get into this because it actually goes into what the Israeli government, like its reasoning behind it, right? So it says, Israel's embassy in Ottawa said in a statement that the delegation was denied entry because the group that had organized the visit, the non-profit, the Canadian Muslim Vote, had received the vast majority of its funding from Islamic Relief Canada, which is a subsidiary of Islamic Relief Worldwide, a well-known Islamic aid organization that Israel has designated a terror group. The state of Israel will not allow the entry of organizations and individuals who are associated with designated terror entities, the statement said. The Israeli government alleged in 2014 that Islamic Relief Worldwide had funneled money to Hamas, a charge the Britain-based group has vehemently denied. The group describes itself on its website as a charity that works to relieve poverty around the world. Right here, guys, this is all you need to know. The state of Israel will not allow the entry of organizations and individuals who are associated with designated terror entities. The fact that they didn't do the due diligence ahead of time, before flying to Israel and trying to go into the West Bank, just baffles my mind. It just baffles my mind. They were given papers to go into Israel, right? But that, like, and that's fine. They entered, right? But you're not going into this place. You're not going into the West Bank. There's no world in which they're going into the West Bank. Maybe they knew. Maybe they just expected, because they're Canadian citizens, that they're going to be able to go into the West Bank and because Israel's an ally. Israel doesn't give a shit. Like they just don't care. All Israel cares about is Israel. That's it. And Israel will work with Muslim countries. They have a great working relationship with Turkey. They have a great working relationship with the Saudis, even with Egypt, for the most part. But when it comes to things inside Israel, Israel doesn't care who it's talking to. Israel cares about Israel. So that's just this Israeli article it really just highlights that same weakness from a different angle, that foreign policy weakness in Canada. So Canada's comfortable taking a moral and public stance toward an ally where it thinks that the costs are manageable, right? But it's a lot more cautious with adversarial powers where it can't retaliate economically, and it really makes Canada look selective rather than principled, right? It shows a preference for symbolic politics over disciplined statecraft. I genuinely believe this. Because we haven't seen actual statecraft happen in Canada in a very long time. And all of these articles together really kind of show how Canada is drifting toward a foreign policy that's driven by pressure points rather than priorities. Like for instance, when trade hurts, Ottawa's pivoting to a different angle. When values are safe, Canada's going to assert itself very loudly, vehemently even. There's not like a clear hierarchy of interests in the willingness to accept any short-term pain in order to preserve, let's say, long-term autonomy of Canada. Everything is constantly reactive. There are no proactive policies that are made within this country, at least not recently. Tell me what you guys think about all of these issues. Please like, share, and subscribe. Stay curious, stay informed, and God bless Canada.